I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Amanda Cox. Amanda is a therapist-turned-novelist who pens stories about characters finding hope, healing, and a sense of belonging. She resides in Tennessee with her husband and 3 children. Her latest novel, Between the Sound and Sea, comes out August 6th. Welcome to the show, Amanda.
Thanks so much for having me.
I am so glad to have you here. Listeners, I got to have a little sneak peek of Amanda's newest book, and it was fantastic. I love to start the show with, I feel like you're so much more than this bio. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I live in East Tennessee, as where I was born and raised. I love this area. I love to travel. So my husband and I, 3 children, we've drugged them all over the place. But we always come back home to East Tennessee because that's home. I'm a nature loving girl. I love to be outside. I'm try to keep plants alive, but I'm really bad at it. Love
Same.
keeping bees. I keep bees for a hobby. I like to, be outside whenever I can because I feel like nature is just a place where everything slows down a little bit in this fast-paced world. Homeschooling mom, so that's what I do when I'm not writing, and
Okay.
so that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. So, and all 3 kids are homeschooling with you then?
Yeah, yeah. So it's been an adventure. I never thought that I would be like a homeschooling mom. I went to public school my entire life, but it's been
Yeah.
an adventure and we're loving it. So
Yeah. We are in the same boat where both went to, I went to public, my husband went to private school, but we were going to be moving 3 times in 3 summers in a row to different
yeah,
states and everything. And our son was going to be starting kindergarten. And we're like, that's like way too much to ask a kindergartner to go to 3 new
that's a
schools
lot.
for the next
Yeah.
3 years. So here we are homeschooling ourselves. I never thought I would be here either. I'm actually a therapist, well, physical therapist turned podcaster. So
Nice.
so now to be home with the kiddos. So I totally understand, and your story resonates with me too. Let's talk a little bit since I already kind of alluded to your newest book that's going to be coming out. Can you give the listeners a little sneak peek or tell us the premise behind it?
So, Between the Sound and Sea is about a young woman. She's grown up in a small town her entire life, but her life kind of gets a little disrupted by this small town scandal that she can't, she's tried to navigate it, but she's sick of it. And her friend finds this job listing to be a temporary lighthouse keeper for this decommissioned lighthouse that a private individual has purchased. And she's like, hey, you could go and work on that lighthouse, get away from it all for a little bit and figure out your life because her background was in construction growing up. Her dad owned a construction company. So she feels pretty, equipped to go and oversee this project. She's not, doing the work. She's just doing all the hiring and all of that good stuff. But she gets there and she realizes that there's probably more to this story than just the lighthouse to be restored when she meets this older gentleman who has bought the lighthouse. And he seems to have like a bigger story behind why he wants to restore it. And she starts doing some restoration work, and she finds these notes hidden in the walls that are lightkeeper logs from the 1940s. That are signed by a woman, but when she's fascinated, so she goes to look into the history of it, and there's no lighthouse keeper by that name. So there's all of this different. It's set in coastal North Carolina, and so there's all of this folklore and legends about what really happened to the last lighthouse keeper and his daughter who mysteriously disappeared. And then there's these, all of these legends. And so she's kind of trying to navigate all of that and piece together what is actually fact and what's fiction and try to restore this lighthouse for this older man. So there's a little history and a little mystery on this North Carolina island.
Yeah, I had chills as you were describing it when you're like, the letter is hidden in there. And I'm like, even though I've read it, like, but it was so cool how it was pieced together and just to think about, I love putting myself in the shoes of the characters and think, what if that came into my life and I got to find this little trail of letters and clues and digging and it was a beautiful story. I loved it. I
Oh,
couldn't
thank
put it
you.
down. I stayed up a couple nights way too late to finish it.
So glad you enjoyed it. I recently got back from a trip to the Outer Banks,
Okay.
that I got to go recently. And so the last time I was there a couple years ago for the research trip, the lighthouse that's on Ocracoke Island was closed for restoration and things like that, so I didn't get to go in. But this
Okay.
time around, it was open, so I got to go inside, and it was really cool. It's a smaller lighthouse. You just like look up and see the spiral stairs going up. But along the walls, the stairs at one point had been attached to the walls originally.
Okay.
And so like in this one interior, the interior is brick. So as you're looking up the wall, there's all these places where they've patched the walls, where the
Wow.
stairs were, and the park ranger's there, and I'm like, there's probably hidden notes in those walls. In my writer mind, there's definitely some history hidden in
Yes.
those walls.
There's something there.
There's got to be something there, of course.
Okay, I was gonna ask that if you had been there and that gave you the idea for the story, or like, how you do that. Do you research and go to the places to be able to help you write about them?
Yeah, I love to if I can. And all of my other stories have been set in Tennessee.
Yeah.
But this time I was like, hey, what if I set a story somewhere that I really want to go? And
Yeah.
so for my husband, our anniversary trip a couple of years ago, I'm like, let's go to the Outer Banks. And so it turned into this research trip in the middle of a hurricane. So that was fun.
Oh
Um,
my goodness, there really was a hurricane there when.
yeah, yeah. So
Oh my
we didn't
gosh.
get hit by like the full brunt of it. It was the outer bands. But
Okay.
you're on these islands that are the barrier islands, and you never know, like you think you know how a hurricane is going to like affect
Oh
an
yeah.
area. But this was an unfamiliar area. I am like the more cautious one, but my husband is like, let's do it. Because we were like halfway there when the hurricane turned and we knew that it was going to be like,
Yeah.
and he's like, let's do it. I'm like, are you sure? Because like, are you sure you know what you're getting into? But yeah, we loved getting to explore the area. It's just, I don't know, it's so unique. And I can only imagine like back in the time when like my character Walt was around, a young kid, there weren't bridges to connect all those islands.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was sort of almost a removed area that was completely different, like from the rest of the country. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. We, my husband is military, which is why we move a lot, and he happens to be in the Navy. So we live in places that hurricanes can come. And so these two Midwest kids were both from the Midwest, like are always trying to navigate like these new natural disasters. Like the first time we were living in Hawaii and they're like, a tsunami is coming, and we're like, what do we do to
Yeah,
prepare for a tsunami? Like literally, I know tornadoes. That's all I know.
yeah, same.
And then there was now in San Diego, there was going to be a tropical storm last year, like which was a downgrade from a hurricane. So thank goodness. But it was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
my husband, of course, was out of town, and I'm like, what do I need to do? Like what do I do for the? They're like fill the bathtubs, and I removed every single item from our backyard in case the winds picked it up.
Right.
But it is always an adventure wherever we're living,
Oh, I
as it
bet.
changes every 3 years, to be like, what do we need to prepare for this time, or what do we need to have on hand in
Yeah.
case this thing strikes unexpectedly? It's like extra water or lights or flashlights or what, just
Yeah.
it's
Is
always a
that what
learning
you've grown
curve.
up with? Yeah.
Yeah. So, admittedly, I think tornadoes are scarier because they're like so unpredictable and they come out of nowhere. Where like a hurricane, I'm like, oh, I mean, I haven't lived through one, but I can prepare. Like you kind of know what's
Get
coming,
out
you
of
can
the
kind of
way
get
if you want
ready.
to. Yeah.
So I don't know. That might be a very naive perception, but of natural disasters. But I totally understand your husband's. Maybe Twister did that to us back in the day, right? Of like going
Right,
to
probably so. Let's go,
watch.
let's go experience. Why?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's a part of me that would be like, that would be so cool to see that. And they talk about like that eye where there's no storm in the middle of the hurricane. I'm like, what does that even look like? I want to see that. Well, I digress. We're on natural disasters now. So, well, what number novel is this for you?
I'm like, wait, which one is it? Because
Yeah.
you're kind of in the middle of like writing one, editing
Yeah.
one, and all that stuff. And so this will be my fourth.
Okay. All right. Because I know I've read The Secret Keepers of Old Depot Grocery Store and then the Bee novel as well, which I didn't know you kept bees. So I was kind of like, oh, that's really cool tie-in.
Yeah.
So, what has been your favorite novel to write so far?
Oh, I don't know. I have different connections with them for different reasons, but I
Okay.
would say this one was probably the one I've had the most fun with.
Okay.
I just had fun with the story. for different novels, there's been like parts of it that like I felt an emotional connection to and things like this one. But when I was writing this novel, I'm like, it was sort of my goal. I'm like, I just really want to have fun. And so I got to go to the place, I got to weave together these fictional folklore stories and weave them into the story. And so I probably just had the most fun writing this book.
Okay. I love that. What do you hope that readers might ponder over as they're reading Between the Sound and Sea?
So in this story, there's a lot of tension between fear and regret. It's the fear keeps us from doing certain things, and then we have regrets based on those actions, whether we wish we hadn't taken the action or we wish we had held back and we wish we hadn't.
Yeah.
So all of the characters kind of have this tension between them of like fear and regret, and what chances do we take and what chances should we not take? What do we hold on to? What do we let go of? And so I don't know. I think that's a probably a question all of us ponder at one point or another in our lives to kind of challenge ourselves in those areas.
Yeah. I loved that about her character was that you've already kind of mentioned it. She was very capable in life, right? Of having been an event coordinator, growing up in a construction business. Like she was very capable, but she was held back by those, that fear and that regret. And so she's grappling with things in another way where I think she could have been timid all around, right, of life, but she was very capable at doing life. It
Right.
was just these like
What do I
mental,
do?
yeah, yeah. So I think that really drew me to the character because, I think we try to see parts of ourselves maybe and
Right.
and and learn through story and how we could
Yes.
better ourselves.
Why I love fiction so much. It tells the truth in kind of a way that we get to, I don't know, either it's either that we resonate it or with it, or it's something that we don't necessarily resonate with that gets us
Yeah.
like in another world when we just get to consider things. And sometimes, with our circumstances that are so immediate in our life, like sometimes those can almost be hard to like access the emotions for sometimes
Yeah.
because we've lived with them and dealt with them. But when you encounter a character, even if their situation is different, but the emotions that they're experiencing are similar, it almost lets you kind of access those emotions and process them on sort of a different level. So
Yeah.
that's why I love fiction.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that helps us to continue to build empathy for others, right? Of
Right.
different places, different spaces than our life. And I might never get to walk in that life, but I can experience similar emotions in a different
Right. There's
context.
there
So,
is a level of connect, even if someone has a different upbringing in life, there is that level of like, oh, I can have this connection, even though sometimes in the world we live in, sometimes things feel like so like polar and divided.
yeah.
But I don't know, stories have a way of like bringing that back down to recognizing, hey, we're human beings and we all know what it is like to be a human being and feel those universal human things.
Yeah. And if we just take the time to listen to the story too,
Yeah.
right? If we take the time to listen to each other's stories, we might be more alike than we think.
Right.
So, okay. And then now that you're on novel four, what have you learned about yourself through writing?
I think a lot of it, I'm learning to kind of trust myself as a writer and trust the process. Um, people will ask me all the time, like, what's your writing process? What does it look like? And I'm always like, okay, I wouldn't advise this to anybody. Like, I would not sit down and teach a class and say, hey, this is how you write a book, because it's the most chaotic and messy. I kind of call myself an intuitive discovery writer, that I'm kind of like discovering the direction of the story along the way,
Okay.
which is really opposite of my normal personality in life. I love step-by-step instructions. Like if you give me the instructions, some IKEA furniture and some instructions, like I love to do that. Like I love it's like a
Yeah.
giant puzzle for me. And I'm like, this is fantastic. So you would think that that would be how I would write books, that I would have it all plotted out and have step-by-step instructions for myself, but that creative side of my brain doesn't work that way. And so,
That's so
you go to a lot of,
interesting.
yeah, you go to all these writing classes about how to plot and all these things. And so I would used to try to like do those things. And my stories just felt dry to me and they felt like I just couldn't write that way. And so
Yeah.
learning to just embrace the fact like, hey, this is how you write. It's okay if you don't know where you're going. Also, I hate unknowns. I love like, but my writing process is a process of unknowns. And so I don't know, it teaches me a lot about trust and faith in surprising ways.
Yeah. And maybe that's what they talk about. I mean, you could probably speak to this more because I'm not a writer, but is like finding your voice as a writer. And that sounds like you've really done that. Like I tried this way and that did not work for me. And now I've just kind of navigated my way and found what works for me.
Yeah. Being
So,
okay with that's what it is what it is, and this is my story, and this is what I write, and
well, and you're writing beautiful novels, so keep it up.
thank you.
Do you have any book that you read before you became a writer that made you want to become a writer?
So I mean, every time I pick up like a really well-written book, I feel like that sense of inspiration. But as far as like the first time like I can ever remember being like I want to be a writer, was in third grade, and our
Okay.
teacher every day after school, not after school, but after lunch, would read "Where the Red Fern Grows" to us.
Okay.
And so I can remember like I was a little 8-year old, and I can remember thinking, um, like I want to do that. Like the author took words and turned them into emotions that I, sitting in my chair in my classroom, could feel. And I was like, that is magic. And
Yeah.
I can remember like I want someday to write something that people feel something when they read it. And so yeah, that's kind of like that book that I always go back to is like that influential book.
Yeah. What a classic.
Yeah.
And definitely will make you feel.
Oh yeah. You're like, whoa, feeling too much here.
Yeah, definitely will make you feel. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about who you are as a reader. What type of genres do you enjoy reading?
I'm kind of an eclectic reader. Well, it depends a lot on kind of the mood I'm in and, what I'm in the mood for. But as far as like those types of stories that are just like my catnip, like if you say, okay, this has this and this and this, but you say to me that it has found family, or it has like a coming of age element to it, I'm all in.
Yeah,
I like historical a lot. I tend to, write more contemporary focused books, but I like reading historical a lot because I love history, but I don't have a brain for history. Like I can learn all the historical facts and they go straight out of my brain.
totally
But if you
agree.
give me a historical story, like it will stick with me and come alive for me more. So I like to read a lot of historical novels too.
I know it always gives me this idea of like, this is how we should be teaching our kids history too.
Yeah,
Because I didn't start liking history until I started reading historical novels, right? And I'm like,
yeah,
because that story behind it. And so I'm like, what if we gave our kids that? What if we switched that for our kids and let them experience
yeah,
that? And I think now there are middle grade, there's these YA novels that are historical. So I think that is more
yeah.
coming, but I don't remember reading that as a kid
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. There was either fiction or there
Yeah.
was, the nonfiction section where you could just learn the facts. But yeah, story, I
Yeah.
think our brains are just wired for story.
Yeah. Lucky for you as a writer. Okay. Well, and then how in your business do you find time to read?
Oh, definitely gets tough sometimes through different seasons, but I'm a late night reader. I love my Kindle Paperwhite for that reason because everybody's asleep and it kind of has that soft glow so it doesn't
Yep.
bother anybody. So I'll read at night. I am not a very good auditory learner, but I've been trying to train myself to um have better auditory learning skills by listening to audiobooks. So I will pick, I like to listen to a lot of light, funny rom-com type stuff on audio
Yeah.
because if it's, slower paced or really deep, sometimes I'm just like, okay, my mind wandered off. But
Yep.
so I sneak in some books through audio while I'm doing chores and stuff around the house. But
That's what I usually tell people that are newer to audiobooks is try fiction first, something with like a lighter storyline. Because if you do zone out for like 30 seconds, it's really not that big of a deal because you can jump back in and you probably still know the thread of the story that you're listening
right.
to. So, so that is great advice. Well, you have been so gracious to bring 3 books with you today for a book flight. Can you tell us a little bit about how you picked these?
Okay, so I picked these because each one of these, to me anyway, has a layer of found family to them, which I love to write that. I love to read that. There's something about people coming together that are kind of like lost in the world and they just finding each other and each having something that the other person needs. So yeah, these are all to me have a big thread of found family to them.
That's beautiful. And I think it's true of life. We all need to find our people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what is the first book you brought today?
Right. The first book that I brought is Other Birds by Sarah Addison Allen.
Okay.
I recently finished this one earlier this week, and I'm just like, oh, I have to talk about this one. So it's about this girl who has inherited this um, kind of condo in a small town, the small island town called Mallow Island.
Okay.
And she is there, and her mother had passed away when she was young, but she inherited this, and so she gets there. And it's famed for these little birds called the Della-wisps, and so it's got like sort of like this quirky feel. And you get there, and like the first day that something happened, that she's there, one of the people who live there dies. And so there's kind of like this whole mystery of like what actually happened. And so it's got like ghost stories and things like this where ghosts make an
Cool.
appearance. And so they are like telling like what like they know things about the characters, and so like they make an appearance on the screen as sort of this first person narrator to tell them about stuff. And so anyway, it's got all these characters who are all a little bit lost. And when this character gets there, she is determined, like she's never felt like connection with people. And she's like, this is my chance. Like, I'm going to make a connection with these people. But all of them they're all like really kind of reclusive in their own way. And so she has
Okay.
this way of like pulling all these things out of all the different people while they're trying to figure out what really happened, and the story behind the woman who passed away, and all that, how they're all connected.
Oh, I love books like this that you're kind of like you're not really getting the answer until the end, right? So you're kind of getting to be you get to
Yeah.
play sleuth yourself as you're reading. Like,
Yeah.
ooh, okay, there's a little tidbit, like who do I think? Or
Yeah.
I love books like that. Is there like a gothic element to it with the ghosts in the story?
I mean, kind of, but it's not really. I mean,
Okay.
okay, it's not really spooky, but there are some certain things that are kind of unexplained, and you're like, wait, was that like a ghost thing, or is there something
Okay.
else going on? So it's not. When I say ghost, it's not spooky, like sort of in a spooky sense, but it's
Okay.
kind of like they're just sort of like characters who get to be on the screen without being on the screen in a sense, if that
Okay.
makes sense. I'm probably doing
It
a terrible
does.
job of
No.
describing that.
Well, and I think that's important to note that like it's not in a spooky way, right? Because I also read at night and admittedly I will not pick up a book if I know it's going to be scary because I'm like I don't want to go to bed with that on the brain and I don't want to be thinking
Right.
about that right before bed and so I often avoid like people talk about,
Yeah.
unfortunately the thriller category often just because I read at night and I'm like one day in my life I'll read thrillers when I have time to read during the day. I just don't have that in my life right
Right.
now. Because they are so popular. It just is, where I'm
Yeah,
at in my world right now.
sure.
Okay. So that was The Other Birds by Sarah Addison Allen. And then what's the next book you brought today?
So the next book I brought is West with Giraffes by Linda Rutledge. And I constantly tell people to read this book.
My
Um,
mom, too. Mom, you hear that?
I just adore this book. And so this is a book about this young man who's like it's during like Depression, Dust Bowl era. And so this it's a story that kind of has it's a fictional story that has some historical things woven into it. But there were these giraffes that were kind of got sort of shipwrecked-ish on the way, because they're supposed to make a cross-country journey to the zoo. And this boy he's lost his family, like he already had lost his family then during the Dust Bowl, things happening there. And so he had made his way to New York with aunts and uncles, and they had all, then a hurricane comes and they die, and he's on his own, and he sees these giraffes. And for whatever reason, he feels connected to these giraffes, and he's like, I'm going to make this journey across the country with these giraffes. And so you've got this cast of characters. You've got like this older man who is like, he's in charge of handling the giraffes. And then there's this young woman who's a photographer who is trying to document everything that's going on. And this young boy who's like, I'm going to be a part of this. And so he keeps trying to sneak in with the giraffes and like make the journey across the country. And so yeah, I just love it.
Okay. All right. And so I'm like, okay, what part of this is real is what my brain is saying as you're talking about this. Like, what part is true history? Because that sounds
Yeah.
like a wild story.
Yeah. And so the giraffes were real giraffes that had to make, as far as the instances that happened on their journey across the country,
Okay.
I'm not sure how much of
Sure.
those things like actually happened. The hurricane that happened was real. The drafts were real. And
Wow.
the journey that they had to make, that they did have to make across the country, was a real journey. And it's also this story that is like like the power of story. And so that's another probably one of like the types of books that will like catch my heart are those.
Okay.
So it's got like found family, coming of age, and the power of story kind of wrapped up in
Okay. Well, if that doesn't draw you in, listeners, I don't know what will.
that.
Okay, so we have West with Giraffes by Linda Rutledge. And what's the last book you brought today?
The last book that I brought is The Happy Life of Isadora Bentley by Courtney Walsh. And it's one that, it's probably classified as kind of a rom-com, but for me, probably what stood out and like that I love so much about it was sort of this found family element. Because you have Isadora Bentley, who has always been like, um, kept herself very independent, um, researcher. And so she's very academically minded and things like that. And so she's coming up on her birthday and she runs across this article that I think it's like 31 ways to be happy or something like that. Anyway, it's an article about how to be happy. And so she thinks that it's a bunch of baloney and she's going to prove it wrong. And so her scientific research to prove it wrong is to do all these ridiculous things. And I love it because it starts out and you're like, yeah, this is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
But along the way, it's not necessarily the things that she does, but it's the people that she meets along the way. Um, that just makes the story for me. But it's funny, and there is romance for those of you who enjoy a romantic read. There is romance, and then for me, who loves found family, there's definitely that element too. So it's
Yeah.
like light and funny, but it like has depth at the same time, and I love that.
Yeah. There was so many good underlying themes there. And I loved too. I
Yeah,
thought the characters that came in on the side were very endearing and you just kind of fell in love
yeah,
with them too. And
yeah. It's like a whole like I want all these people to be my best friends now.
yeah. Yeah. And like giving people, and they were the most unexpected people, right? Like she would have
Yeah,
never done that if
pick
she wasn't
them.
doing this
Yeah.
challenge. And so just to think like giving people a chance, you just never know. So
Yeah. And just to take the chances and figure out where life takes you and yeah, be open to experiences. Yeah, it's fun. Fun
yeah.
book.
Listeners, I was telling Amanda this book happens to be set in the town next to where I grew up, or part of it. And so that was super super fun because I'm from not a large town in Illinois. So to like see it in a novel, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So that drew me in too because it was like, oh, I love this. So I told all like my high school friends, I'm like, you guys need to read this. The
That's
Woodstock is in
awesome.
there. So, okay. Well, thank you so much. So that was The Happy Life of Isadora Bentley by Courtney Walsh. So thank you so much for bringing those books
Yeah,
with you today. Well, how I love to end the show is with our bonus pairings, which are just a speed round of questions. So you can answer these really quick. Are you a rereader?
absolutely. There are certain books that are like they're like visiting old friends. I have to reread them.
Yeah. I heard that's a really good cure for when you're in like a book hangover. When you like just
Yes.
can't get into another book is going back and revisiting an old friend. I haven't tried it yet, but I have it in my
Yeah.
mind of like next time that happens, that's what I need to do.
Yeah. Or if I'm really tired, I'm like, because sometimes you're just like, I don't really have the energy for a book. I don't know what I'm getting into, but like if you
Yeah.
know what you're getting into,
Yeah, makes it a little bit easier to slide in.
yeah.
Okay, and then what is one book you've read that has changed your life?
I have to go back to Where the Red Fern Grows because
Okay.
that is kind of like what made writing come alive for me. But every book that I read, I feel like influences my life in some way. It inspires me, it encourages me, it makes me think. But yeah, always go back to that one.
Yeah. The power of books. And then where is your favorite place to read?
Oh, I anywhere that I can. I read in bed a lot when I'm going to sleep, but I do love to sit outside and read.
Okay.
Have a rocking chair on my front porch. I like to go out there and enjoy that spot.
That's like my daughter. I don't know even where we were just recently, and she saw a front porch. Oh, we went camping. So we went like more inland in California, so it's more country out there. And there was this beautiful
Yeah.
house and they had a front porch. And she's like, I want a front porch. And I was like, well, we'll probably have to move from San Diego. Like, front porch isn't on the menu here in San Diego. But she's like now obsessed with this concept. Like even the other day we were at the store and she saw a really cool chair. And she's like, that would be great on the front porch. And she's 6. And I'm just like, she's fascinated with the front porch,
I love that.
which is adorable and cute. And I'm just like, okay, here we are, but we'll have to move soon, Dad. So we can go get a front porch.
Porch.
So, all right. Well, and then lastly, what are you reading next?
Oh, what am I reading next? I'm trying to think. What I have this whole stack of books because I have had all of this awesome book mail that
Okay.
just came in, and I've been kind of like trying to meet this deadline that I've been working on. Let's see. I think I want to read Cole and Layla Are Just Friends by Bethany
Okay.
Turner. Because I'm like, I'm in the mood for something funny and romantic and that kind of thing. So I think that's going to be next.
Okay. Perfect summer read.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show with me today. I know your time is precious and I appreciate all you've given me.
Absolutely. It's been so much fun.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Amanda Cox and her Found Family book flight. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information about today's book flight or other books that we talked about. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are reading next, especially if you have heard about it on the show, please tag us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your review not only helps the show, but it also helps the podcast to reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure you will not miss an episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.